Oh. Doesn't say that it started on the That's the second one on the left. First one. The left there.
Oh, this left.
So even in the silence, it feels really. So even in the silence, it feels really different.
What feels different from what?
Well, it's just the energy feels more richer with a different flavor of awareness, just a different texture than it did before you started. So is that just a noticing of flavor?
It's just hypnotic suggestion. It's a result of I mean the texture of experience is continually shifting, and it can shift like around a stimulus or around a piece of information that seems to imply something that sort of serves as a fulcrum to redirect it to whatever the texture is. But of course, it's absolutely unstable and immediately morphs into something else. But you know, it's important to realize that there's no better or worse in these textures. They're just different shades of difference. So you know, a pissed off, shallow, bored, stupid texture of experience is not inferior or superior to a in-depth, insightful, sensitive, open texture of experience. Mind you, you're free to and orient to any textures you find valuable as artfully as you can, but you don't get or lose anything from that. The only thing that's important is what it really is, and what it is true for every and any texture. It's being that's important, not what it looks like.
Right.
And yet what it looks like is the revelation of being. So it's always the continual interface point of being, but we're expert at being distracted from being and caught and swept up into the flavor that is presenting us.
There's something about the silence that comes from when you start that is, I don't want to be examined, or I don't want to be on display, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm not sure quite what it is. And everybody's sort of loose with their conversation, and suddenly it stops. And everybody's like, should I say this or shouldn't I say that? You know, I don't know what's going through their heads, but something is.
Funny. Well, there's certainly no need for that. I mean, this is not.
No.
a formal occasion and no one's going to be called to task for anything. There's no authority structure here.
I've got to put in the time.
Well, there is a community over there for bad questions.
If only. Well, it's like, it's like Mahesh brought up, we're more or less programmed in our personalities to respond to certain stimuli in various ways, which again is neither here nor there. And so these sort of orientations come up or are evoked by situationally or by, some activity or some, symbolic structure or what have you. But again, that's neither here nor there. It doesn't need to not happen. It doesn't matter if it does happen. It's not of the essence.
Mm. But there's something about everything I say after you start is going to be taken with more gravitas, more. It's going to be thought about more than if I just pass off a flippant comment, which I might have done before it started.
I take your flippant comments with great gravitas.
So do I, but nobody else.
Well,
I don't take anything with great gravitas.
well, yeah. Mm.
I mean, I've heard you talking for a long time, Peter, about how nothing is any different from anything else.
Yes.
And I think it's just more recently that I actually take that as the face value.
Mm. It's literally true.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
And even in terms of satsang, in terms of the silence or in terms of whether there's a question or not. The caregiver in me has always been a little like, ask a question. Yeah, I mean, these days I'm not really concerned about that. It's just, it's like just noticing ourselves and noticing what our propensity is. And so.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everyone has these personality mechanisms and programmings that have a knee-jerk reaction to respond or situate oneself in certain circumstances. But again, that's neither here nor there. It's fine. Really, the point, whether that's there or not, of course.
And even when there's nothing better than anything else, I have my own exclusions. It works in most situations, but there are a few where, which is just good noticing material, really where I have to just then go remind myself, like, oh, whatever.
But even mattering is itself doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So it's not like it needs to not matter.
No.
That doesn't matter.
But it is interesting to notice that there are areas where I seem to think it matters.
Right, yeah, for sure. Right.
And so it is, I don't know whether there's any value really in that, but it just is that wide sweeping spectrum, that we continue to examine to see, does it work here? Does it work here? What about over here?
The mind and personality effortlessly gets caught up in all these games of am I doing this? Am I doing it well? Should I be doing it differently? And then like coming down on itself for the assessment. And I mean, just all sorts of, structures and assessments and assessments of assessing. And I mean, just all sorts of endless complexity that at the end of the day doesn't count for anything. But it is the texture, it's the medium of experience.
Which, you know, is another layer really, isn't it? That it isn't me who's doing that anyway. It's just this presenting me.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the real discovery. That's the real revelation. I mean, that what I call the radiance is the not just the primal fact, but it's the only fact. So the apparition of anything, of experience, and then what it happens to look like, and what something happens to look like it, relative to something else looks like, and their seeming interaction and so on and so forth, is totally nothing. It's the fact of its appearing. It's the whole shooting match.
Yes.
And that's hard to get, again, because we have a lifetime, at least, of history of being invested in all this gamesmanship of, comparing this and having value judgments and self-assessment and so on and so forth. The mind is an expert at conjuring seductive intricacy.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, well, it's fun,
I mean, I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning if I didn't have that going.
No, of course, sure. The mind is the floor show.
Yeah.
This one.
So Peter, last time you told me to feel my feelings with the fullness of my being.
Yes. Did I? I'll take your word for it.
She's actually takes notes and brains
Okay.
You're ready for the whole class? Contingent on how you did this week.
So I sort of feel into that, and it's like so it's like how people who talk about the heart and the heart mind, like it's
I'll take your word for it.
but like it's an organ of perception, but also of like thinking, right? So anyways, like I've got my normal sense of myself, thinking Gavin, and all of these ideas and thought of my personhood and whatever, and like this whatever organ of reception, right? This sensing organ, it feels like something separate from that, right? Like it's like it's just a sort of feel, like a sort of, and what it feels like it's this sort of like an energetic presence, or but anyways, it's kind of curious that it feels like it's separate from this usual sense of myself.
So what about that?
Well, so is it the fullness of my being that I'm feeling my feelings of?
Is that the fullness of your being that you're feeling your feelings?
Is it? Is it?
First of all, it's impossible to feel anything by anything other than the fullness of your being, because the fullness of your being is what experience is. It can present as with infinite differences and infinite subsystems and infinite, self and other, and mind and heart and body, and I mean just all of these subcategories that seem to have some distinction from each other, semi-autonomous or autonomous systems, but all of that is just a seeming. There's only one thing here that includes all of itself. So all of these apparent subsystems are just different textures different implications of this that is here. And so they have no importance in themselves, particularly in terms of classifying them or mapping them.
It's also what I notice, like when I'm feeling from that sort of zone of experience, I guess, or when I'm present with that sort of sense of experiencing. It seems like a feeling is not really like an emotional feeling. That doesn't seem very different from like a sensual or a sensory feeling.
Sure, no perception is ultimately different than any other perception. A sensory perception or a mental perception or an emotional perception or anything is just different textures of the same thing. There's only one thing here, and it is experiencing itself. That's the only thing that's actually happening. And all of this complexity and all of this, of different textures and different experiential characteristics are just flavors of that, none of which depart from it in independent existence. Like in a dream. When you dream, there's only one thing happening, that's the dreaming. And yet all of this endless complexity can seem to appear actually exist autonomously. It's just the textures of dreaming itself. So again, all that's fine, but it's not particularly worth, except for entertainment value, pursuing it or categorizing it or cataloging it or that sort of thing. Because what's valuable and what's powerful is seeing the underlying actuality, the underlying substance or the underlying event, if you like, rather than, rather than attending to the differences in its apparent presentations.
Well, it feels like that sort of that field of awareness is like deeper and broader than my usual sense of things.
Maybe, but the actual field of awareness is infinitely deep and infinitely broad, and it's the only it's the only experience you've ever had. So that being the case, it's valuable to notice that fact, because in that case you're noticing the actual condition rather than some distorted aspect of it. Mind you, the actual condition includes infinite distortion, but the distortion does not actually create separation, doesn't create separate parts or separate systems. It's infinite, it's the ultimate funhouse mirror. I mean, all of this literally infinite differentiation of infinite differentiation. I mean, infinity to the power of infinity of difference, and yet there's no different thing here. There's only one thing here.
And everything is transcendental experience?
Of course. Everything is experience, and experience is transcendental. Try and pin down exactly what experience is. I mean, you don't need to hold it as transcendental on faith as if that's some wholly exalted quality. Transcendental is the simple fact that it's obvious, but you can't find it. You can't pin it down. Try and find experience. I mean, you can't miss it, you can't lose it, but you can't find it. It's like trying to find the present moment. It's completely blatantly obvious, but you can't find it. You can't pin it down. So on and so forth. And of course, that's true of any and every quality whatsoever.
Well, so like, I have an idea that if I if I'm feeling this sort of field of awareness or field quality, right, that maybe I should hang out there and see, see how much I notice there.
It's an interesting experiment, but it's no more valuable than any other experiment. Some broadened field of experience is no more or less true than some focused, obsessive, zoomed in field of experience. They're the same thing. They're just different ways that this actuality can appear. And there's no value system, there's no value whatsoever between those two apparent conditions. In other words, one's not better or worse than the other. And you know, a very simple way to put it is no apparition has any value whatsoever except as a display of actuality. It's actuality that has all value. And actuality is beyond partiality. It's beyond, it includes, but it's beyond differentiation. Actuality never becomes different than itself. And yet, you can only find its infinite differentiation as evidence of it. So it's very paradoxical. But when you start looking at this differentiation versus that differentiation, you're missing the point.
So it's not valuable per se to notice distinctions or differentiations. It's valuable to notice the sort of wholeness of which the distinctions or differentiations are a part.
I wouldn't put it that way. I would say it can be very useful to look at differentiations, but it's not the differentiations that are important. It's the nature of differentiation, and that can be found in differentiations. So here's my hand appearing in the field of vision. Here's this appearing in the field of vision. So they appear as differentiated. What's up with that? What's going on there? Just as a koan, just not to think about it, not to come up with a theory about it or a dissertation about it, not to come up with an answer to a question, but just is actually present. And you will only find one thing present. The only thing you can find present is experience. This is experience and this is experience. This looks like this and this looks like that, but the this and the that are not actual because the actuality is experience itself, which doesn't become anything other than experience. There's no this experience and that experience. Experience is one thing. It's an infinite, inclusive continuum. And yet it presents as apparent infinite differentiation, paradoxically. And the normal human mode is to go chasing willy-nilly and enthusiastically after all the differentiation to, try to make money or impress people or get laid or whatever. But all of that and all that's fine, but that's not the point. Realization of liberation comes from seeing actuality. And actuality is not in the slightest bit different than itself. It does not in the slightest bit depart from itself.
So one's making progress if one gets to the point where the differentiations or distinctions collapse in upon themselves, or
you're making progress when you stop worrying about whether or not you're making progress.
And
that's not just a joke.
It's ironic, really, that whichever way you go, there you are, because it's like every path that you follow is this.
Yeah, that's a very silly and self-evident and amusing, You know, wherever you go, there you are. That is really a profound fifth instruction. You know, wherever you go, there you are. So you go here and you go here, but they're both here. Here is what you have. You here, and all of this is just you here. It doesn't cancel out or negate the differentiation, but the differentiation is merely the actuality. It's not actual differentiation. Again, like in a dream. A dream seems to have a lot of actual different elements and entities and components and events in it, but there's only one thing actually there, which is dreaming. That is the action and that is the substance of what's there, and there's absolutely nothing there. You wake up and you know there was nothing there. You don't wake up from a dream and have to put away everything that appeared in the dream, clean it up, sweep up after it, throw it away, because it's just not there. And even when it was there, it's not there. This is what the Buddhists refer to as emptiness. You can't find, everything appears, but you can't find anything. The residue, nothing's actually here. It just appears, it's an appearance. It appears as if it was here, but there's no it other than the appearing.
I have things from dreams that actually are. I dream that I need to pee. I wake up and I sure need to pee.
Well, that's just a synchronicity.
Are there like traces or residues or reverberations or reverberations?
Again, that's trying to come to understand and map the differentiations, which is not valuable. Sure, there's all kinds of apparent traces and reverberations, but they're all themselves just apparitions. The memory is obviously a very powerful apparent trace, and so on and so forth. You know, and yet, when you're looking for memory, all you find is experience. You don't find memory. When you're looking for memories, all you find is experience. You don't find the memories. So again, classifying whether or not there are traces is going into trying to map the interrelationships of apparitions, which don't actually have any interrelationships. They have apparent interrelationships, but no actual interrelationships, because there's nothing there separate to have an interrelationship. So it looks like you and I are having an interaction now, right? Maybe. It looks like you and I are having an exchange. But there's no exchange. You, me, and the exchange is all just appearing as a unified event. There's no separate parts, separate components. You can see it in terms of being separate components, but that's an imaginative overlay. That's a mental interpretation that is being supposed to apply to the single point event of just this flash of apparition of nowness.
So a moment ago you were talking about no longer wondering about making progress is making progress, right? And that's because wondering about making progress is a comparison with the past, right? And still being stuck in.
Yeah, but don't take that too literally. That's partly a joke and partly relative to thinking you're making progress having any importance. But not thinking you're making progress doesn't have any importance either. Or let's say forgetting about it doesn't have any importance. That's just another apparition. You know, I'm a carefree, free spirit. I don't care about anything. It's like, so what? It's just an apparition. or I'm weighed down and I agonize about everything, and I really worry about this and worry about that and struggle with this. It's like, okay, so what's an apparition? It's exactly the same condition. It looks different, it's describable in different terms, but it's actually exactly the same condition. It's just a field of apparition. When you go to sleep, the world disappears. When you die, the world disappears. When you blink, the world disappears. But it's not important that the world disappears, and it's not important that it appears when you open your eyes.
It would be if it didn't.
Says you.
We just ruined my new product, Dream Cleaner.
Not to worry, there's a lot of suckers out there.
Yeah, just you go ahead.
It's all about marketing.
Does that come in spray bottle?
There was one spray and all the things.
There's a spray bottle, and then there's the ecological approved version for 50 cents more that's in a pump bottle.
Is it like clearing your browser history? I think they have Dream Improver.
The focusing on the actuality of being does seem to have a different quality than not focusing on it and ignoring that it seems to have more beingness in itself than the fact of paying attention to it, or just feeling it, experiencing it, and being the being.
Yeah. Most of that, I mean, yes, absolutely. Most of that is by contrast to our accustomed mode of not doing that. And again, at a more subtle point, when you become when one develops greater expertise at investigating being, one discovers one can't actually find it. So, and yet, as an experiment, extricating oneself from the normal, obsession with the details, and trying to attend to being itself, is an excellent exercise. But then, after a while, one goes around full circle and discovers that, in fact, being lost in the details is attending to being, because there's no being which can be found which is distinct from anything. But that's a little.
Well, it's the, on the end of it, it's just the black and white, either or, isn't. I mean, it's just the play of those two things.
Well, yes, but ultimately those two things are the same thing. And then whether it's on or whether it's off is irrelevant. It's a non-event. And yet, like we're talking about, extricating oneself from the habitual obsession with attending to details and circumstances and objects and so on and so forth, and trying to direct attention to the bigger picture, to being itself or something like that, is an excellent remedial exercise, just to sort of shift gears and explore how radically different this can appear with a different, from a different perspective or with a different orientation. But ultimately, one discovers that even when you're attending to being, you're not finding being any more or less than you were when you were ignoring it completely, getting lost in the sauce.
You find the process, or you find the experiencing. You find finding.
Well, yeah, but yes and no. Again, yes and no.
Or, I mean, I guess people call it awake, or you just see what you're doing, or you just
Yeah.
see
Well,
it.
yeah, I understand, but
I hear what you're saying.
I mean,
But the other's just as
most spirituality is geared towards moving from delusion to awakeness, moving from being lost in imaginary distinctions into discovering and settling into a unified actuality. But that's only the first half of yoga. It's good. It's very good. It's a necessary and powerful strategic shift to explore that. But then the second half of yoga is exactly the opposite. The second half of yoga is letting go of prioritizing being over phenomena and discovering that phenomena were always nothing but being too. Being can't get lost. It doesn't need to be found. But seeing that is profound. But one doesn't need to see it by pulling away from phenomena, which is but again, that's a good strategic exploration. But it's not really important, because this is kind of theoretical consideration. The important thing is how it is for the individual, how it is for you. And so working with what it seems to be like to you is the only thing that actually has power and actuality and meaningless, rather than some theoretical overview of of what it is or is supposed to be. So someone that seems to be lost in differentiation, frustratingly, this can be a very powerful, from that point for oneself, it can be very powerful to the way in which all of this differentiation is aspects of something actual that is right here, and discovering that actuality. But once you have discovered that actuality and become, solidly grounded in it, then what?
It seems to find itself.
Of course it finds itself.
It just,
Yeah, it never lost itself. But anyway, but like I said, these subtleties are just not really relevant. They're not really important, unless they are important. Depending on where one finds oneself.
Well, engagement is always 100%.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So is something like charisma simply a certain type of engagement that has a certain functionality about it?
It's just a flavor. Everything is just a flavor. Charisma is a flavor, and non-entityness is a flavor. Wimpiness is a flavor. And there's no hierarchy of value among them. There's different flavors. It's like one is chocolate and one is spinach,
But is it just like a certain quality of engagement of the persona? Is that?
Well, but again, you're trying to structuralize it in terms of causal elements or structural elements, and there are none. It's a way of summing up something which is not actually sum-upable, or actually is not amenable to analysis. Charisma is charisma because it seems like charisma, but if you're looking for what it actually is, you won't find anything. You won't be able to pin it down. And you may seem to find associated sub-elements, but you won't be able to pin them down either, so they aren't actually there or findable, even if they seem to be.
From the awakened view, is there any importance, or is it only about realizing the actuality of things rather than looking at the differentiations?
Yes, but not exclusively. That's That's the essence of realization is seeing the actuality of things. But of course, the actuality of things includes apparent differentiation. And so there's no basis for discrimination. In realization, in complete realization, there's no basis for discrimination. But there's no need to exclude differentiation. There's no need to exclude apparent discrimination. There's no need to exclude anything, because all of it is actuality.
It seems that most of the preoccupation in the world is in the differentiation.
Yes.
And so when one acts in the world, it almost seems like you have to pick up use some kind of differentiation.
Well, yeah, but the differentiation is not important. It's whether you know what it is or not. And if you know it isn't actually differentiation, then it doesn't matter if you do it or not, because you're not going to caught up in. It's like being lucid in a dream. You don't need to stop dreaming. You can be lucid in a dream, but carry on, even though you know it's not really there. It's not really like that, but you're still. But it's not negated. It's not canceled out. You can still participate in the dream and so on and so forth. But you're with the perspective, knowing that it is a dream, not thinking that it is autonomously existing actualities that are a complex situation that is entrapping.
And that includes the play of improving so-called the differentiation from one differentiation to another.
Sure. In unrealization, it seems like everything matters. In realization, one knows for a fact that nothing matters. But in terms of what that should look like or how that needs to be enacted, one has carte blanche. Just because nothing matters doesn't necessarily mean you need to sit on the top of a Himalayan mountain in a loincloth and holding a flower. You know, you can go out and go to bars and pick up girls and do whatever you want to do, or not. Or maybe you do want to sit on a Himalayan mountain with holding a flower. Who cares? What difference does it make? Since it doesn't matter. So then the karma just plays itself out. But there's no sense. But there's no sense of potential entrapment, which is why it can be called liberation. It's liberation from, the possibility of a sense of entrapment. Without needing to negate or cancel any mode of apparent apparition.
Feeling is an apparition as well.
Sure, yeah. Everything that could have a word put on it is an apparition. And virtually everything that can't have a word put on it is an apparition.
Peter, do you have beliefs and presuppositions?
Do I? Sure. Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. So when you see someone that you've known before, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see one of us again.
Mm-hmm.
don't you have certain beliefs or presuppositions or memories that that sort of about that person that detract in a way from the feeling of radical newness about their
No, there's no detraction. Because there's no interaction. Having a belief doesn't interact with the presence of phenomena. So light is, the red of your shirt is present in my field of vision, whether I think this about you or think that about you. So the immediacy, the newness, the absolute novelty of this apparition that I've never seen before in every single detail that's presenting itself is not blocked or in any way touched by what may be happening in terms of memories or beliefs or what have you. And again, since all of that is in the nature of apparitional event, none of it matters. So it doesn't need to not happen. Basically, the experience of a realized person looks exactly like the experience of a non-realized person. Just the realized person doesn't give a shit. Knows that none of it has any importance. So it doesn't, whereas the non-realized person may be more inclined to be having internal struggles and tensions with what they're doing and what they think they ought to be doing and being self-critical and all that sort of thing. The realized person just doesn't really give a shit, so most of that will tend not to happen. But even if that happens, they won't give a shit. So even if, there's me and then I think I should be different and there's self-loathing or something, it doesn't matter, so who cares? It's just a little flicker in a light in this infinite light show.
Well, so if there's like self-loathing or whatever that's arising for you, it's like you don't act on it or you don't buy into it so that the karma doesn't run.
Well, I don't think of it as self-loathing. It's just a weird texture. But it might be what I might once have called self-loathing, let's say.
And is there like a sense of neutrality or I don't know, equanimity about?
Yeah, but I mean, but again, it's not an equanimity of some kind of stasis or some kind of a, aloofness. It's an equanimity of fuck it. When you know for a fact self-verifyingly that nothing hangs on anything that happens, then what difference does it make what happens?
And nothing hangs on anything that happens because there's no causal relation?
Yes, because nothing is actually happening. The only thing that's actually happening is what I call radiance. You could think of it as being experiential apparition, if you like. That's the only actual event here, that's the only actual thing here, and it doesn't interact with itself. The entire event is simply in the radiance itself, in the apparition itself. And then the fact that circumstantially there's some kind of a seeming virtual interaction of seeming virtual subcomponents and all that is just circumstantial. It's just chance alignments. So it looks like, so I'm going to pick up my water. So it looks like I'm moving my hand and I'm reaching my hand and my hand's picking up the water. And so my hand picked up the water, right? But there's no hand, there's no moving, and there's no picking up, and there's no water. All there is apparition. And you can call this phase of the apparition the hand moving. because it appears that way. You can call this phase of the apparition grabbing a cup because it appears that way, and you call this phase of an apparition picking up the cup. But actually, what's happening now and what's happening now is exactly the same thing, which is radiance, apparition. It's like in a movie. You know, whether the hero kisses the girl or kicks her in the face, it's just a pattern of light on the screen. What difference does it make?
Kisses the bloke or kicks him in the face.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Indiana Jones can have his way with all the Nazis, right? Who gives a shit? Because it's just patterns of light. There's no actual interaction. You know, the one character is not actually interacting with the other character on the movie screen. The only thing that's actually happening is the light hitting the screen. That's the actual event. This is exactly like that. It's just that the screen is and the light are infinitely more, literally infinitely more complex and subtle. Not really, because that is also, the movie and the screen are also infinitely complex and subtle, but perhaps less obviously so. There's nothing but absolute infinity and absolute subtlety no matter where you look.
So there's seeming preference,
Sure.
right? And there's appearance of some arisings resonating more with that.
Sure.
Right. And then there's like is what happens, like there's this sort of I don't know, the placing of importance on that resonance or non-resonance.
Maybe, sure. There can seem to appear. But even placing importance or not placing importance is just an apparition. Placing importance is itself entirely unimportant. The feeling that something matters doesn't matter. And the feeling that it doesn't matter doesn't matter.
But that's like the distraction from an understanding of, like a immediate full understanding of radiance.
What's a distraction from what?
It is, like I get carried away with my preferences for certain actions, and
Yeah, but that's because you think they're preferences. They aren't preferences. They're just flashes of light that show up in a texture that you are in the habit of calling preferences. There's no you, and there's no things that you're preferring or avoid or not preferring. So it looks as if there is, but again, there's no you, there's no thing, and there's no preferring or not preferring. They're all just that's a circumstantial implication of an apparition, which is nothing other than the apparition. I mean, Indiana Jones goes on the screen and he really prefers to get the treasure, and he doesn't prefer to get the shit beat out of him by the Nazis, right? But that's not true. There's no Indiana Jones. It looks that way, but Indiana Jones doesn't prefer anything because there's no preferences, because all it is light on a screen. And you're exactly the same way. Exactly. Except you can't find the screen. And for that matter, you can't find the light, but.
Well, we can find radiance,
Well, you can't avoid it, but you can't find it, you can't pin it down.
but we can also see a seeming reproduction of radiance.
Sure, there's all kinds of seemings. There's endless seemings of this and seemings of that, but the operative word there is seemings.
All
The
right,
seeming doesn't
so-
actually become anything else. The seeming itself is just radiance, so it hasn't actually gone anywhere. It's not a development of anything.
Reproduction is not just radiance, it's radiance reproducing itself as radiance. It's more than radiance. It creates, I mean, we're saying that there's no, I mean, on an absolute level, okay, but in terms of, experience and living, radiance creates, additional radiance. I'm looking precisely at, reproduction,
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
There is, I mean, you say there's no cause and effect, but something happens with the radiance so that it doesn't stay static. It creates.
The radiance never stays static, and all creation is only apparent creation. It's still just patterns of light.
It's the appearancy that is what is lived. So, I mean,
The apparency is lived. It's not excluded, but the apparency is actually radiance. The apparency is nothing other than radiance. It's not like there's radiance and then there's apparency, and apparency is being lived, and then the radiance is over here, kind of behind the scenes, being cruel or something. The details are the radiance. Indiana Jones is light. Indiana Jones is just light from the projector. That's all he is. And Indiana Jones falls in love with the girl, and he gets her at the end of the movie, and they run off, and he impregnates her, and they have all sorts of little Indiana Joneses running around the screen in part 2. And the little Indiana Joneses, what are they? They're just light coming from the projector. What a surprise. So was there actual reproduction?
yes.
Yes, okay.
If this is just a movie, if you're equating that with.
Well, this isn't just a movie, this is what this is, but the movie illustrates
Well, see, I
the
think
principle rather nicely.
except what this is more than a movie. I mean, it illustrates a certain aspect of it.
Yes.
But the problem is, this isn't just a movie where you turn off the light and suddenly everything that was seemingly real.
Well, every time you go to sleep, that happens. When you die, that happens.
Turn off the light.
The light turns itself off, but even when it turns itself off, it doesn't actually go off. It just changes texture. Things are appearing and disappearing all the time. It's bright and then it's dark all the time. It's defined and then it's totally vague and undefined all the time. We experience these conditions, these vast changes and oscillations of conditions all the time. Most of us are in the habit of thinking of it relative to a fixed objective world, so that's the reality, and all this vacillation is happening in the context of that. But in actuality, a fixed objective world is just a hypothetical extrapolation, an imaginary extrapolation based on the presence of the patterns, which is the only actuality that can be found. And the presence of the patterns. I told you never to call me. Anyway, why don't we take a little break? We'll be back in 10 minutes. Well, it's better to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
They're outside the door. They're outside the front door.
What's this book about? Anne? You said you liked it. About that you said you liked. What is it you liked about it?
Which way?
This book. Yeah, what is it?
Oh, well, I've been, trying to do different types of writing. And some of it is like, based on a true person.
Yeah.
But this woman does it in a very
Oh, that's right.
interesting way. I mean, she does do some interviews and, but it's very imaginative. How she recreates, life of a woman that hardly anybody knew anything about, yeah, but
They took her cells and created other,
yeah,
and then they had, they became people.
yeah, and basically, her cells are just being used all over, all kinds of different places. It was just sort of done without her knowledge or permission. And
Did it create embryos, did it create people, or?
no, this was,
It was just-
it was, different types of, medical, procedures and we've been using, cellular, biology and medicine and they have these cells and they sort of experiment with them with different drugs or, all kinds of stuff that's been going on.
And she considers those cells her. She considers those cells that they took from her body as being her.
No, the fact is they took her cells and they didn't tell her. And they've been using them over and over again for a long time. And sooner or later, it just started coming out and her family learned about it. So it's partly it's partly a story or an exploration, of medical use, without people's permission. Not that it harmed her at all or anything like that.
Was it just this one person, or did they do it to a lot of people? And she just happened to, her family just happened to.
Her cells were
Peter, I was talking about our process, right?
the most widely used.
So what does it do if there's no water?
Yeah, of course it needs other people's.
Is there a sense of like,
But even if it's
And I
not
think this
like-
book came out sort of, I
no,
think,
that's one.
Yeah, sorry.
there was,
So
I'm gonna
the big story that came out about how they sort of, doctors examine patients with syphilis without.
Well, this is,
That was.
it's a little extreme, it's a little polarized.
They're both.
So that you have two races and you have a 10.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this story sort of grew out of that in a way, because she didn't
Again,
have.
it's fire, air, and earth. So it's, again, that's a contrast right
I
there.
just like the techniques of how she weaves all these different.
The Three of Swords shows a kind of a nice open-ended inclusiveness, but it's not, being a three, it's not particularly practical or engaged.
It's like 20 hours for what?
Not practical advantage, but isn't it better for the swords to be lower numbers?
Yes, sure. That starts hers, but that's a nice sword. One of the best. But the card is not the issue. The issue is the whole circuitry that this implies. I would say this is a circumstance with the Leon there, and the two aces. This is a situation of great potential. And the 10 of discs down there, but the potential isn't really engaged with the circumstances very effectively. So this is again this situation of potential that's going to play itself out. Like a cross like this would be interesting to see what happens. Without these two. Then it's becoming more into more actualizing this rather than just having this potentiality. See what I mean?
Yeah.
One, aces tend to be potential. I mean, they're very so primal if they haven't. It's like having all possibility, but no specificity. You know, no concrete. You know, groundedness. You would say. On the other hand, you have this most grounded card in the deck right there. So this is a very interesting polarization there. There's nothing to really tie them together. As you say, no rudder. If there were rudder, that might help to tie it together a little bit.
Oh, really?
Because water talks to the earth very well, and so that might bridge it. But here the earth is basically has nothing here to talk to at all. So even though this is a lovely earth card, it's very full. It's not connected to what's going on here.
That's interesting. Yeah. Leif was saying that it was a picture of enlightenment, but that's not the case. It's just a picture of great potential.
Well, enlightenment could look like that, but enlightenment can look like anything.
Okay, thank you.
He asked.
Yeah, he asked, you told.
I think I'm enjoying
Yes.
pretty good. Okay.
Yes.
I'm in my
it's
happy
a real-
place. Happy place.
Want me to get some and send it to you? Oh,
Peter, what's your new drawing?
It's a beta blocker. I don't remember the name of it. It's supposed to be good for my heart and my blood pressure.
But it makes you a little hazy.
It's interesting. I like the way it makes me feel,
Yeah.
but not particularly from a physically functional point of view.
In fact, I have a whole lot of them in Australia.
I just started today though, so we'll see how it shakes out.
See what his starch-based, sweet, soft dessert. Known to have been popular in Britain and Ireland from the 17th to the 19th century.
What is this?
Flummery.
Flummery.
A fruit flummery. It's sort of like often a custard or, something with fruit in it. The Hessian's made a variation on a flummery. But it is very
Hey,
common.
Mahesh, you missed out Saturday. It was pretty good.
Oh, good.
But we'll have something like that come in the beginning of October.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get more people there.
Yeah, apparently somebody liked it. Ajay liked it.
Yeah, people liked it. There were like, sort of, at first like we had a lot of new people.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where'd they come from?
Two just randomly and one I invited. Yeah.
Shall we resume?
So it seems very freeing to see everything that happens as just an apparition.
Yes,
I mean, it's just apparition. There's no connection, there's no consequence, there's no cause, there's no effect. It's just
yes,
happening.
yes,
Yeah.
sure.
Well, it seems to be happening that way whether you think it is or not.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, it's sort of like it's interesting that we've cobbled together all of these sort of inordinate stories about what's going on.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So wound up in it all, and you know, it's like,
Yeah, and all they are is stories based on a free association of stories we can tell about all these patterns, you know.
yeah.
But the patterns are just instantaneously present.
Yes. Light plus light equals light, light by light equals light.
Well, I mean, maybe that's not the whole story.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's,
maybe the devil's doing it.
It's counting on people thinking. You know, someone who went, we project light on a screen and bingo.
well, the new analogy
They
now.
fall for it and they give us money, millions of dollars.
Light, I mean, it's like light isn't a thing or a separate entity.
Right,
We don't even know what it is.
right.
It might have lots of interaction in it. It obviously does. It's not just a static thing. It's not a thing.
It obviously does.
It obviously is not just a thing or.
It's not so obvious, and that's a conclusion.
Well, we can't know what it is.
That, exactly, the conclusion that light has interaction is based upon the observation of light. So there's no outside corroboration. You see what I mean? In other words, if I dream that there's a box sitting in front of me, and I dream that there's a ruler, and I take the ruler and put it up next to the box and say, oh, it's exactly 1 foot high, how interesting. But there's no outside corroboration from outside the dream to say whether the ruler actually is 1 foot, or whether it's 1,000,000 miles, or whether it's a micron, or whether it exists at all. It's only internally consistent. And the field of experiential apparition, you can't get outside of it. So it's only internally consistent. And so any conclusions you can draw about, or suppositions you can draw about the way it works, is based on the apparition itself. So it's possible, but it's only a hypothesis. I mean, sure, you know, it's a matter of what is undeniably self-verifyingly true versus what is possible. Anything is possible. Is it possible that the objective world exists? Absolutely. Is it possible? I mean, is it possible? Is it possible that the neo-Nazis are right? Absolutely. You know, anything's possible. But but these possibilities are theoretical or hypothetical extrapolations, conceptually, based upon the appearance of apparent patterning in experience. And you can't look at the patterning from outside to verify or to criticize any of these hypotheses. But the one thing you can be certain of is that the patterns are appearing. So that's the bedrock. That's undeniable fact. And then and anything more than that is a possibility. You can't disprove it, but you can't prove it either. But what can you prove? What's self-verifying? The apparition itself. So you've got, that's bedrock. So you've got that. That's undeniable self-verifying fact.
Well, we don't, what is?
The fact of experience.
Because you don't know what that experience
We
is.
don't
No, of course
know-
not.
We don't know what that is.
Of course not, you can know.
But we do actually know what it is. We
Well, you know that
experience
it's-
it all the time.
You know that an
Well-
experience is experience,
Yeah.
you know, but you can't, anything,
Can't
knowing what it
categorize.
is, i.e. an interpretation, is going to be hypothetical and involves mental extrapolation and supposition. Which is fine, and all of that effort is fine, and you can't disprove it, but neither can you prove it. And since there's an infinity of contradictory hypotheses that can be generated, there's no basis for choosing among them. But there is a basis for going to what is self-verifyingly, undeniably actual. And that has more weight than something which may or may not and unverifiably be the case. It's just it's a matter of practicality. It's a matter of empirical, it being empirical.
So we can't really talk about cause and effect and consequence, and we
Yeah,
don't know.
exactly.
We actually don't know.
Yeah, they're hypotheses.
Pattern. We don't know that either. I mean,
Right,
you
but in
say
term-
that without.
Well, in terms of is verifiable, things don't matter. Let me put that, rather than talking about how things don't matter, let's put it another way. What appears is that's integral. What appears does not depart from itself, and is a sole being. It's what you are. So you are not a small apparition within this. You are not a small creature subject to some vastness that's outside of you. You are this vastness, if it's vast, or smallness if it's small, but you're this, whatever it is.
You're what's happening.
You're what's happening.
Yeah.
You're what's happening. And if you're what's happening, then, and what's happening doesn't become different, regardless of what it looks like. What's happening is still being, regardless of whether it looks like paradise or it looks like hell. I mean, here Trump is president and the neo-Nazis are taking over, and this looks like being. And, you know, we had altruists, you know, some golden age of altruists ruling the day, and there's peace on earth and, you know, universal sufferance and socialist state and, you know, whatever. And being is just being. It's not improved by by looking good, and it's not damaged by looking bad. And this being is you, it's what you are. So therefore, what you are is independent of what it looks like. And that's the sense in which it doesn't matter what it looks like. Now, mind you, you're certainly free to orient to that however you like. You're certainly free to experiment with that things matter and to play games of mattering, and that's all fine. But even that doesn't matter. Is not improved by you doing that well, and being is not damaged by you doing it poorly. You can play Monopoly, and you win the game of Monopoly, and being is just sitting here being. You can lose the game, and being is just sitting here being. You know, you can have a healthy, successful life with a warm circle of acquaintances and just be a really wonderful person, and being is just sitting here being. Or you can be a neurotic, shrewish person holed up in a dark room, being scared of people and Fox News or whatever, and being is just being.
The prejudices show you.
But I didn't say which one I prefer, did I?
Oh, whoops.
Okay, you can be a wonderful, altruistic person with a big circle of warm friends and be watching Fox News. Or, can you? Did you see what I'm saying? Powerful. The reason, it's not that it doesn't matter as a point of philosophy of like, you know, so let's pretend it doesn't matter because that's a fun. It's because the only thing that is self-verifyingly actual is invulnerable to what it appears as. And since any sense of you existing has to be that, because you can't find anything other than that. So if you exist, you are that, then you are invulnerable from what things appear. And the implication of that is this: it doesn't matter, not in a negative slapdash sense necessarily, in a profound transcendental sense of being is invulnerable to apparition. Which means you are invulnerable to apparition, because, if like I sit here, I can say, I feel like I am. But when I say I am, what I'm really saying is this is. The field is. And that is what, when I say me, that's what I actually am referring to. When I say I am, I'm really referring to the being of this field. And this field, the being of this field, I can be sick, I can be pissed off, I can just be having the worst day possible. I can be in the emergency room getting sliced up. And being is just sitting here being. It's like the movie screen is not burned to
You can wake up in Afghanistan, you can wake up in underwater, you can wake up right next to the wall.
Doesn't matter.
That
So effectively, nothing changes with this knowledge,
No.
What we do with our life
Right.
doesn't necessarily change either.
Not at all.
It just is a big load off.
Well, you see what it always was, and you see that a lot of the more problematic circumstances that you seem to be occurring in your life were actually conclusions that were leapt to on inadequate information.
Yeah.
And when you see what's really here, you see there's no basis for those conclusions, and so all of the kind of catastrophizing and fearfulness and so on just dissipates in relevance, because it's personality, that's part of your temperament, I suppose. But it just, so what? It's just because there's no basis for it, so it's not actually, it doesn't have a powerful actuality. Whereas what does have a powerful actuality reveals itself as
And it does become a point to return to again and again.
yeah, well, you can't leave it, so it's really obvious,
It doesn't appear independently of circumstance.
No.
Either. So
So there's no dichotomy whatsoever. They're damaged by circumstance, but at the same time, circumstance is it.
Yeah.
So any circumstance is a revelation of this transcendental invulnerable being. And Yuan discovers that beautiful circumstances are that, but even horrible circumstances are that. It's just a different flavor of the same thing. And and again, this isn't theoretical when it comes to see that it actually is like that. I mean, it's sort of structurally how it is, what it is, and that gives it forcefulness in terms of the implication of that fact, in terms of what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of like a shaking free of all relationality in a way.
Rationality was always hypothetical.
Yeah.
The actuality that the hypotheses were based on is actual, but you're calling it a relationship, and all it really is just a present, analyzable stew of rich experiential qualities, rich dynamic experiential qualities. So you can have your dear friends and you can have your intimate relationships and all that, but rather than parsing them as being friends or being relationships, all it is just the flavors of the symphony that is your being. I was mixing my metaphors there. Flavors of symphony, melodies of symphony, flavors of stew.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Flavors of flavors.
You don't see me worrying, do you? Oh no! Oh no! I said that wrong.
I think flavors of stew and melodies. Melodies of stew and flavors of symphonies. Perfectly appropriate under the circumstances.
That's the nice thing about poetry is you have a lot of license.
I think the matters word is kind of a, it's full of baggage, and it seems like predetermined that the character in the movie is trying to optimize and look at things that either matter or don't matter. But when you say nothing matters, it's just, you know, sort of basically saying the being doesn't really change, whatever
Yes.
apparitions or.
Yeah. But it says that nothing matters is a heavy-handed way to put it. I would rather say that what seems to happen has no importance. It doesn't need to not be that way. So, you know.
No importance to me also could sound nihilistic, you know.
Could be influenced.
I mean, as a statement or as a philosophy, it might seem nihilistic and all that. But
That's not the point.
this
The
is
point
an
not-
observation of the physics of it, of the structure of it. You know, light is not affected by hitting your eyes after coming off of a tortured corpse, or light is hitting your eyes in a newborn genius baby.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
The light is light.
Language
Light is
can
not
have some-
tainted.
Some, you know, flavor or baggage with it, and so
Yeah.
for me, at least, if I use a language and I'm trying to describe being, then there's no addition or subtraction to it, regardless of
Yeah.
the circumstance.
Yeah, and language will always do that. I mean, language distorts by having all this implication. But language, actuality can't be captured by language anyway. So when you see this, you become very forgiving about language, and rather than trying to be precise, you know, you can just relax and give it your best shot with the certainty that you're going to miss it. It's going to be sloppy no matter how careful you are. So what? You know, you just sort of have an attitude of a laissez-faire and more kind of forgiving attitude.
It's very almost spontaneous, hypnotic quality of awareness, right? To believe, if you believe
Yeah.
in a certain language, that it creates that experience.
Yes,
Full
yes.
infinite experience.
Yes, yeah. Awareness has this, or consciousness, whatever, has this astounding property of, if you give it a seed implication, a seed concept, it will have an innate, to virtualize that, to simulate that experientially, to try and make the experience feel, what would the experience feel like if this notion was in fact true?
Not even to do anything with that, it's just
No.
to notice it.
Yeah, exactly so. Yeah.
And so is I don't know, if an abidance in this actuality is something that you're talking about, but if it is, I would say, who am I as a sort of a pointer to that actuality? Without using language, for me, it's just like taking sort of even a split-second break from whatever hypnotic condition I'm at. Because, and without even using any words, it's just like, I don't know what it is, but I can't really describe it, but I'm not.
I mean, seeing you can't really describe it as seeing it. If it seems like something you can describe, then you're missing it. Because actuality is entirely undescribable. It cannot be abstracted accurately. You can't create a model of it or a map of it. It alone is the only accurate map of actuality is actuality itself. So you can't abstract it, you know, and of course, language, the very nature of language is abstracting it, a model of something, which, and as soon as you do that, you've lost the thing itself and you've substituted a vastly oversimplified, you know, stick figure concept for it, not the thing itself. But, you know, the fundamental point of all this is not to come to some way of seeing it, but to come to see that you've always been seeing it and nothing but, and you've always been it and nothing but. So it's actually strangely and paradoxically effortless, because you're not trying to achieve some kind of, you know, sophisticated overview that you then have to inhabit. You notice that in fact you have always been inhabiting that very inherently. You can't not be where you are, which is in and as everything. And whether you see it or not, you still are it. And not seeing it is as much it as seeing it is. And so, you know, again, and yet when you see that, and see that it's undeniably certain, then you don't need to hold it. You don't need to keep seeing it, because even not seeing it is seeing it. And then that, again, that's sort of not giving a shit. To put it in sloppy terms, of looseness, of the certainty of the invulnerability of what you actually are to what seems to be happening. So your being is not dependent upon circumstance. Circumstances appear within your being, and you are unaffected by it.
So it seems like abidance is almost not the correct, and there's no perfect word, but it's not even the correct word in that case. It's more of an investigation whenever it comes.
Yeah, I mean, it might look like that in terms of exploration, but it's not some abidance you need to achieve. It's discovering that you intrinsically abide, and you have always abided. You know, the being that is here abides, and that being, and that being abiding is you, is your abiding, and it's always been the case. You know,
it's abiding and stopping imagining that you're not abiding.
Well, that can appear, and all sorts of things can appear, but again, its abidance in itself, in its own being, is not affected by what appears. The appearance of a subsystem, a sub-entity, which it can then pretend to identify with. So if you identify with yourself as a personality, or as a body, or as a history, that's a partialization of what you actually are, which is the whole shooting match. And so that's done as a result of this hypnotic mechanism of consciousness. It's not actually like that. There is no separate body, there is no separate personality, there is no separate history. All of those are what's the word? They're very selected out of an infinite data field of information, and they're being identified with as, oh, this is me, and everything else is not me. Now that's done hypnotically in imagination. In fact, everything's you. And the being that abides is everything. Of course, everything abides in being, and everything exists because being abides in being. And that's the only thing that's happening, and that's you. But then the seeming apparition of this subsystem, this human being with a history and a body and a personality and strivings and ambitions and so on and so forth, all of that is just an abstracted sub-event within this, but that's not actually separated out from this continuum of the whole shooting match.
And the point is not to change any.
The point is to just see that that's the case. And when you see that that's the case self-verifyingly, then the implication of that becomes very clear. So even as you are busy identifying with your personality and your body and your situation, that whole event is just a game that this being is playing within itself that doesn't actually depart from itself and doesn't actually exclude anything which seems to be excluded from that game. So, the color of the paint on that wall over there is as much you as fire or your most profound fear. We used to think of that as just objective random unimportance, and you used to. I'm not saying you do. I'm saying one typically does. But this is me, and this really matters. Whereas who gives a shit about you want to paint the cabinets a different color, paint them. I don't care. But in actuality, all phenomena are equally you. All phenomena are, all apparitions, let's call it, are equally expressions of being, which is, and they're all the same. They all have the same weight. So the appearance of my hand and the appearance of the rug behind my hand have the same weight in my visual field. In imagination, I can identify, but this hand is me, so it's much more important than the rug. We give a shit about the rug. But in fact, they have a completely equal weight in terms of the presence of light in the visual field. Applies to all aspects of experiential qualities appearing in their respective dimensions. Now, when you see that, you don't need to stop doing it or fight it, but you see that all this separation doesn't create an actual separation. So I can separate myself out and say, I'm more important, and I can be a hedonist, and I want pleasure, and screw everyone else, whatever, right? And even all that doesn't affect anything. Or I can say, no, that's not true. I'm going to be a, altruistic guy and trying to, live for a higher aspiration. And that's okay. That's cool too, because that doesn't affect anything.
Does the hypnosis drop? Or does it have any? You said nothing really ultimately matters more than anything else, but
it doesn't.
It seems like in a lot of we like to hear people having so-called awakening experiences, and if the profound ones, people basically say, I can't find my old personality or whatever. They still have some kind of flavor, but they don't feel so much as.
I would say that the hypnosis loses its sting, but it may or may not appear as a phenomena. Tension loses its sting, but it may or may not appear as a phenomena. So, like, for example, I can, in my visual field, I can sort of direct my attention to the whole thing globally, or I can look at that light or that light switch. So the focus of attention, the whole field of vision is always present, but the focus of attention can seem to zoom in or can seem to broaden out. But that's a non-event. Nothing's actually happened when that happens. The field isn't lost when it zooms in, and the field isn't more present when it's, being more globally perceived. And the same is true with these hypnotic mechanisms and these partializings of interpretation and identification. So when you see that they aren't true, they lose their sting, they lose their relevance, whether or not they actually cease as phenomena.
And yet for some people, it seems like the dropping of that hypnotic quality is significant, much more than for other people.
I don't know, who knows? That's their problem. It's wisdom for you. And only you can answer that question by exploring it, rather than expecting it to be like someone else's experience. Experience may be very different, or what they think they are may be very different, and their experience reflects something different than they're claiming it is. Who knows? That's their problem. The issue is, what's up with you? And it's very iffy to attend too much to what other people suggest, because again, you can't know how out to lunch they are, or how just a whole different critter they are than what would be relevant for you.
the way you is also completely unknowable.
Yeah, but that's what you have to work with. That it's unknowable, but it's actual. You can't.
What's that?
Yeah. Well, but you always sort of dance with it, even if it's improvisation and even if you're clueless about what's really going on. Just to, trying to look at what's the adding insult to injury by, well, this is unanalyzable, but what someone else says is going on with them is like twice as it's even more so. I mean, you're on very thin ice there in terms of reliability.
Been noticing that one thing that kind of seems to prop up a lot of delusion is identification with the drive for self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to notice that on the other side of that, there seems to be at the same time a drive with like a self-destructive drive.
Right.
And they both kind of reinforce each other.
Sure. They're both poignant. I mean, if one looks at one's urges or one's nature, you can find all sorts of different conflicting and contradictory, vectors or desires or drives that, many of which have little to do with each other, many of which are downright contrary to each other. And yet, it doesn't have to make sense. Humans, in terms of personalities or as functional entities, are not integrated. Humans are a chaotic system that is basically trying to pull itself apart. And for many people, it succeeds. But again, that doesn't affect what they really are. That just affects the functional personalities, mental, mental, physical system, whatever, which is again just an arbitrary subsystem within your true being. And yet, this subsystem has its nature and has these. It's an intrinsic, whatever drives and so on and so forth. And when one coming from a more naive place, one is heavy-handedly identifying with all that stuff. But again, as one develops in yoga, one comes to see that all of that is not really as much you, as much privilegedly you as it seemed to be at one time. And so again, even though the phenomena is present in experience, it recedes as being particularly central or particularly urgent. And also one develops the maturity to see that the fact that it's chaotic and fighting against itself is neither here nor there. It's just luck of the draw.
Well, the main thing about trying to identify anything as self, well, it's going to be, as you said, it's going to be a partialization.
Yeah, exactly.
And the more you identify as yourself, constantly be under threat. Because it's just partial. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
It has to be maintained. It has to be, heavy-handedly reinstated. The boundaries aren't really there, so they have to be keeping redrawn. Kind of insistence.
But is it?
It's unimportant. It may or may not be avoidable depending on your temperament and your history, your circumstances. Raised by enlightened parents, or suppose you have, the fortune to be in a culture or a tribe or a social unit where, really sophisticated, ideas are presented that minimizes that kind of a thing, maybe, sure, but again, it's not important, so that's neither here nor there, that's not the point. The point is not to achieve some condition over some other condition, the point is to see what it is, whatever condition happens to be present, see what it is, that's what matters. Even if it's a horrible condition of...
Is there a way to avoid keep reinforcing the conditioning by partializing your view?
No,
Such and such,
seeing,
I have to do these things.
the only solution is seeing what it really is. Seeing what I call reading presence, seeing the fact of experience, and that all of these apparitional complexities of systems are just arbitrary appearances of patterns within an experiential field.
Including the partialization.
Of course. And as is everything else which is not being included in those identifications. And in that seeing, the relative importance and self-importance and urgency of all this identification just reveals itself as invalid. It's just not actually true. And again, that may not stop the apparition of that mechanism, but as it diminishes in relevance or urgency, that becomes, who cares, it just doesn't matter. And a lot of that has to do with the temperament too. I think some temperaments inherently are, more, let's say, just simplistically speaking, and some temperaments are less egoic, and maybe an inherently less egoic temperament may find it easier to, let go of those kinds of things. But again, that's neither here nor there, because that's not really the point. It's just that itself is just another accident, luck of the draw.
But are there ways that are more conducive to one versus the other?
The one which versus the other which.
Egoic or more egoic?
No, that's just how things happen to seem to be. It's not a matter of choice.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I'm sort of thinking about the trajectory of my life, the current trajectory of my life, ins and outs, and why this happened, and then this happened, and something else happened. And, none of them are really relevant whatsoever. They're just the appearance of this. They're not actually anything to do with me, my life, the events that took place. The reframing everything is very freeing.
And yet it's all permeated more or less with the flavors of your nature, of your, however, whatever that is, and however that, however you would think of that.
Really interesting to bring I'm this way because of these events to, well, these events happens and I'm this way and they're not. Whatever I'm supposed to experience is happening in way, no matter what.
Yeah, well, maybe, but it's a constellation rather than a causal relationship. You're the way you are, and the events are the way they are, and all of that appears like a constellation, pattern, the way it happens to be. Again, inscrutably and unanalyzably in terms of what's up with that and why it is and what it is. But the simplistic causal relationships that we are familiar with in terms of that, and this causes that, and this is this way because of that. But because ultimately, if you're really scrupulous with that, and you take it far back, it's self-defeating. Because of this factor and this factor. Why is this factor the way it was? Well, that factor is the way it was because of these factors. Okay, why are those factors the way they were? And it goes back to the Big Bang.
Yeah.
Like that, I mean, if you're not too scrupulous, if you don't take it too far, it kind of makes sense. But when you really take every element of the chain and say, well, what's up with that? It either opens into infinity or it collapses to a point of infinity. And I mean, the whole thing just, it reveals itself as obviously really heavy-handed. And really say is it is as it is, and it seems to be kind of the way that it seemed to be permeated with those flavorfulnesses. But again, you're looking for any of that, you can't really pin it down or be precise of exactly what was it, and exactly how was it, and exactly what did it feel like. It's nebulous, it's vague, it opens up, it's subtle and infinitely silent. And all elements of life do that. They open up into this, divergence. And that's the nature of radiance. Radiance implies detail, but when you go hunting for the detail, it diverges, and you never actually get to a point, a convergent point. It can't be done. You go towards anything, and whenever you start going towards much more than that to deal with, and you go into any of that, and that diverges more, and then much more again, and so it's like after a while you forget what you started off looking for, because God knows where you end up.
Right. When you know who you are.
Yeah, well, I mean that's either here or there drops away, but the phenomena is obvious. I mean, you can't, nothing can be found. I mean, that's explicit. But the finding anything certainly just drops away because you're good fucking luck.
Well, it also becomes completely
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not actually like that.
Is that drug you're on again?
I don't remember the name. All I remember is it's called a beta blocker. Oh, you want some?
I'm having it right now.
Does romance tend to exacerbate that egoic partialization?
It doesn't exacerbate it, they're one and the same. Romance is egoic exacerbation. Romanticizing anything is building up a fantasy story elaboration about it. And that's the very nature of egoicizing it.
But the aberration is not about the person or the experience. It's actually just the aberration itself that we fantasize.
I'm sorry, I don't know. What aberration?
Well, I mean, in romantic, where we're just sort of obsessing about a person, place, or thing.
Right.
Actually, the person, place, or thing.
Right.
It's actually just the obsession.
Right. Which is the very nature of egoic identification. I mean, all that, egoic identification in the most direct sense is simply that, and projecting fantasies of what one might be, and then actualizing that and living it as if it was true and as if it was mattered, and all of a sudden you're living your own soap opera. But all that's generated by this romantic projection actually are that way, that they actually fall together more or less into this storyline. But in actuality, that's not the case. So when you see that the actual circumstances to the romantic projection, then you see that you never were identifying with yourself. You're just identifying with a story that you're calling yourself.
It would seem that the engagement with romantic projection would be more fun than realizing that nothing matters or
Has it
No, because they're not mutually exclusive. matters, then you can engage with romantic projection and identification with much more wild abandon. Because then it becomes all pleasure and no pain. It's like going to a movie when you know it's a movie. You know, then all of a sudden you can go to horror movies, or you can go to slasher movies, or you can go to chick flicks because who gives a shit? It's just a movie. Whereas when it matters what movie you go to, then I only go to these type of movies. Types of movies is, you know, horrors or whatever. I did. I was imagining. I was imagining someone who was sort of an elitist in terms of the movies that they was. I'm just as an arbitrary and absurd example.
I don't think it's absurd. I'm very arbitrary about the movies I go to.
Well, of course. Who isn't it?
But if you happen to find yourself in a B grade movie, John, you could probably manage.
No, he'd be up in a huff.
I actually love B-grade movies.
Not that there are any distinctions, but it seems like there's, if there were distinctions, there would only be one distinction, and that one distinction.
Well, the drawing of distinctions is what all distinctions are.
Sure.
So in that sense, I follow you. I mean, and then the specifics is just you're just, you know, seizing on an example to do that one distinguishing. I'm not sure that's exactly what you meant, but
In looking at any distinction, you're looking at the distinction.
yeah, you're looking at distinguishing itself is the drawing a line is saying this is this and that's that, and what's on this side of the line is different from that, and what's on that side of the line, what's on that side of the line is different from what's on this side of the line. That's what distinguishing consists of. And any and all distinguishing is just that, whether you're distinguishing self and other, or you know, the left side of a computer from the right side of a computer, or anything. You're saying, okay, this is this, and it's different than that, and that's that, and it's different than this. Whereas in actually, you're denying the continuum that they're all embedded in, that they actually consist of.
Is distinction the only action that can take place?
No, distinguishing doesn't really take place. It's not really an action. The only action that takes place is apparition. And apparition can look like distinguishing. But distinguishing never actually happens. Actually, apparition never actually happens. But that's getting ahead of ourselves.
I mean, to the extent that any action can happen, it seems to be that distinction is the only action that can be made.
Well, distinction is the basis for interpreting that an action has occurred, or interpreting what the action is, for sure. But you know, as I said, distinguishing is drawing distinctions itself is not an actual action because it can seem to appear, but it's not. That's not actually what's occurring. What's occurring is it seeming to appear. That's the actual event. See what I mean?
It just eats itself.
Yeah. It eats itself before there's anything to eat. I mean, it's inherently self-eaten. So that's actually a very powerful point. That's you know,
Yes.
that's the really the essence of Dzogchen yoga in Tibetan. They have this principle they call self-liberation, which means everything self-liberates itself, which means by the very nature of what anything is, it is beyond that. So it's already liberated from being whatever it is because it already never was that. It was already more than that. And it's very analogous to what we were just talking about.
It's sort of the ultimate reframing, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's the intrinsic reframing that the being itself does just by the nature of it being the way it is.
Yeah, it's doing itself.
So the passage of time is that, and every instant, everything that's appearing is already gone, it's already disappeared. Then it's seemingly replaced or what have you in the next instant with perhaps quite similar, but actually fundamentally completely different panoramas that are also already completely gone as soon as they appear, and so on and so forth. So it's this continual, not being continually being beyond what they seem to be, which is what the central principle. And the essence of Dzogchen yoga is noticing this principle. Noticing that everything is intrinsically beyond what you're holding it to be. Intrinsically, so even before you notice that that's the case, it's already the case. And as you get more sensitive to noticing that, this sort of the time of the loop becomes so, and something will appear and you look at it and you go, wait a minute, that's more than that, and then back. So there's sort of a little time delay there. As you get more sensitive, it goes faster and faster until you get to the point where the apparition is the release. So it's just real time with zero gap. So your experience is a continual disappearing. That's what Dzogchen realization in terms of that principle is called.
Which disappears.
Yeah. You see the fact that there is nothing to believe in. It doesn't stick around or stabilize or resolve. I mean, I sort of call this unresolvability in a broad sense, and I don't know if that's a better or worse way of putting it, but that's kind of what I've been doing in recent days.
It seems like a really long time since before I was involved with it.
Well, whatever.
Try years.
I'm doing the best I can.
Are there like pragmatic ways to increase that sensitivity?
Yeah. Notice, attend to the way it actually is, and notice its intrinsic instability and its intrinsic infinity of detail and its intrinsic instantaneity of detail. So any experience you're with has literally too much information to sum up. And that information exists only in the non-existent instant, so it's already gone as soon as it appears. The actuality of what you're experiencing is always gone and was never there as anything, because it's literally it's an infinite, it's a bottomless field of information. Again, not theoretically, but in fact, you notice that the experience actually is substantially that way. And so this is not too hard to notice. And once you notice it, then it becomes progressively easier to notice, because you develop your own sensitivity and skillfulness at being able to, yep, sure enough, that's how it is.
To me, you tell me that's something along those lines. From the visual, and a lot of times just checking in, relaxing, whatever I'm focusing and looking at I don't know if I'm drawing it as negative space, what is it called?
That's fine, whatever, Jim.
And just attuning to senses in general. Because I find myself a lot of the times the hearing is listening to whatever chatter is going on,
Right.
rather than the world.
Right, yeah.
And so just attuning to that.
Sure. Yeah, let an experiential dimension or field be present. Just let it be there as a whole. And it will immediately display those qualities that we were talking about, that I was talking about. without analysis or reasoning, it's a felt obviousness that it is like that. Yeah, the fact that it becomes obvious that there's no way to accurately collapse that down to a description or capture it in any kind of modeling.
And it seems like there's, at least where I am, a gap between that experience and when I'm performing something.
That's probably, again, more habit and more by contrast. As you become more and more skilled and more sensitive at being able to do that, you'll be able to notice more sort of spillover, more common ground between those two modes. And ultimately, they're the same thing. You know, at first they can feel very different, almost opposite. You proceed, you notice that in actuality, the open view doesn't actually exclude, generates all the analysis and interpretation and so on. It includes that, and on the contrary, the mode of analysis and having all the details and playing the game and all that doesn't actually exclude undefinable, ungraspable fields of experience. They're actually, of course, one and the same. And this becomes more obviously so as you become more sophisticated over time. So instead of moving from one way to a better way, at first it's kind of like that. So you're training in differentiated or non-interpreted experiential actuality. And more and more skillful at that, as I said, then you notice that is actually this too. And then it becomes less and less polarized until ultimately it's not even all polarized. It's just different perspectives on the same thing. But again, that's sort of theoretical. And the main thing is to work with it however it actually seems to be for you now, rather than aspire to some way that it
whatever resonates naturally.
Yeah, exactly.
In the moment.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's powerful for you because it's actual.
Could you say some more about the freedom that comes from bucket, or it doesn't matter? Because I don't know. I guess I understand that to a certain extent. That's just like what that called to mind for me was a sort of analysis paralysis that I jumped into in the past, of like, especially like with decisions. If I decide this, then
Right.
it's going to change the course of my life, or
Right,
something like that, and then so don't, yeah.
Right. But what it really frees you from, though, is the weightiness of concern. It may or may not make a difference in terms of how you function, but the sense of urgency that things really matter, it dissipates. That's what you're free. That's what you become free of. I mean, in traditional spiritual parlance, that's called freedom from suffering. And suffering is not actually the patterns of circumstance that appear. That matters. Because then you're tormented by either not getting what you want or getting what you don't want. when you see that none of it doesn't really matter, then whether you get what you want or not, and don't get what you get what you don't want or not, it's like who cares? So the suffering of it's horrible. This is this is terrible. I'm not going to get such the sort of the catastrophizing of it with such a great urgency and importance. It is rendered meaningless.
So, it doesn't matter or quite a bit different from apathy.
I don't know. What exactly do you mean by apathy?
The sort of listlessness of, well, it doesn't really matter.
No, because that kind of apathy is sour grapes. That kind of apathy is a lie, because that kind of apathy thinks it really does matter. It's just reacting to the fact that it thinks it matters, which is the stance of it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. It's the opposite of apathy.
It's actually a very compassionate act. To see the clarity of it not mattering.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, sure.
I mean, I just always remember you saying at one point that the most compassionate thing we could do is actually to attend to this.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you define compassion in that?
I know.
Right.
I'll leave it to Lily. She brought it up.
No, it resonates, but I'm trying to see if you have.
I don't.
better way.
Compassion is not a word that I use very often.
That's why I was asking. But
I didn't use it, so.
For me, it feels, I don't know if this is also what you would say, but because I've done the apathy kind of thing.
Sure.
And that was obviously a misinterpretation and didn't feel good. Let's put it that
Right,
way.
because it's not really liberating.
Yeah.
It's a pretense. It's a pretense of.
It's very intellectual and
yeah.
It feels bad.
Yeah.
View the compassion is more self-directed. It's not a.
Yeah.
It's not an outwardly
Yeah.
focused.
It's self-forgiveness.
It has ripple effects.
Yeah. Either you forgive yourself for all your absurdity and your silliness. I'm not a stance of forgiving yourself,
No.
but in fact you do forgive yourself
Yes.
because you see it
Just
doesn't
get on
matter.
with things.
Yeah. Anyhow, it's about quitting time, so why don't we knock off?
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.